Hello creeps! Andy here, and today I have kind of a strange video for you, but hopefully you guys will all be on board and join in on this interesting journey that I've got for you. So in the last video, I mentioned that I read James and the Giant Peach. I came up with some really dark, twisted theories to go along with it. Now, this wasn't anything that I was looking for, but as I started reading the story more, I thought, I don't think this is a story that people think it is. Now, I don't know if I'm reaching, I don't know if I just look at everything through a horror lens, or if this story is actually meant to be about a young boy who's murdered by his aunts, but that's what I'm going to try to convince you of today. So in college, all my teachers always said that it doesn't matter if you guys end up with different ideas of a different story, as long as you have textual evidence to support your claim. So today I'm providing with the textual evidence, and I'm trying to convince you that James and the Giant Peach is in fact a story about a young boy who gets poisoned to death by his aunts. Are you ready? I'm going to give you some different ideas. It might seem random at first, but I promise I'll circle back and everything will make sense why I'm bringing it up. We're going to talk a little bit about symbolism and what I think different things in the story mean. Obviously, this is just my theory on things. It doesn't mean that this is true or the author's intention by any mean, but I do think that it is interesting, and I think there's enough pieces to fit together to be able to read this through the lens of a horror story. So let's just get started. First, let's talk about the story of James and the Giant Peach. It's a story about a young boy. His parents pass away. He goes to live with his aunts who neglect him and physically abuse him in the book. He ends up getting these magic bean worm things from this creepy guy, and he accidentally drops them. They fall into the soil. The peach tree grows a giant peach. He crawls inside. Let me shut that off. He crawls inside of it, and he goes on a crazy journey to get away from his aunts with a bunch of bugs. That's basically what the story is. Let me get my cat out of here before she destroys anything further. Okay, no, come on. I'm very excited. That is what the story is about, or so they want you to believe. But I actually think it is much, much darker than that. So first, let's start really quickly with the aunts. So the aunts actually say something pretty telling, I think, over here on page 39. So they lock him out and they tell him that he's not allowed inside, and they say, I wonder what became of that horrid little boy of ours last night. He never did come in, did he? And the other aunt says, he probably fell down into the dark and broke his leg. Or his neck maybe, Aunt Sponge said hopefully. So right here, we see that they are hopeful that he breaks his neck, right? So they don't care about his well-being. They obviously physically and emotionally neglect him. But I think that this is a telling line because I think that they're serious about the damage that they want to do to the young boy. And again, we'll come back around to this in a second. Just keep that in the back of your mind. There's also no one around on the hill. So this is talked about pretty early on in the story. They live in a ramshackle house on the top of a high hill. The hill was so high that from almost anywhere in the garden, James could look down for miles and miles across a marvelous landscape of woods and fields, and on a very clear day, if you looked in the distance, you can see his old home. It also says that he was never allowed to go down off of the hill, and neither Aunt Sponge nor Aunt Spiker could ever be bothered to take him. The garden, which was at the top of the hill, was large and desolate, and the only tree in the place was an ancient peach tree that never gave off peaches. There was no swing, no seesaw, no sand pit. No other children were ever invited to come up to play with poor James. There wasn't so much as a dog or a cat around to keep him company. And he spent long hours at the bottom of the garden, gazing wistfully at the lovely, forbidden world of woods and fields and ocean that was spread out below him like a magic carpet. Okay, a lot to unpack there. So, first of all, not even a cat or dog in sight, okay? No people, no nothing. They were isolated at the top of this hill. This is important in a second, but let's really quick touch on that peach tree because there's also one more comment about the peach tree a little bit later on. So Aunt Spiker says, look, it's a peach in the tree, and the other one says, I think that you're mistaken, my dear Spiker. That miserable tree has never had any peaches on it. Keep these in the back of your mind. We're coming back to touch on these, but first let's talk about how James acquires these magic bean things, okay? Because what happens is a creepy man, is actually in his bushes and hands him a bag of this. First of all, here's a picture of him, okay? That is a villain. If you're going to draw someone that's trying to save you or help you, that is not how you draw them. I remember watching Star Trek with my 2-year-old nephew, and he knew the Romulans were the bad guys because of how they were shown to you. You know what I mean? Like that is intentional. It is intentional so kids can identify the good guy from the bad guy. Now, in this book, James is creepy as well, and I think he's kind of portrayed as like a soulless child, and I think that's honestly even telling in itself, because the first picture, he's like kind of creepy, but he's smiling, he's got a cat, and so I think that that's intended to display his emotions. But this guy, he's evil. But let's talk about what happens. So he ends up giving him a bag. It says that he was crouching a little now and pushing his face still closer and closer to James's until the tip of his long nose was actually touching the skin on James's forehead. So this is how he's talking to the boy. It's just all creepy. Okay, red flags everywhere. He's talking about how this thing's made, and he says 1,000 slimy crocodile tongues boiled in the skull of a dead witch for 20 days and nights with the eyeball of a lizard, add the fingers of a young monkey and gizzards of a pig, the beak of a green parrot, the juice of a porcupine, and 3 spoonfuls of sugars. Stew for another week, and then let the moon do the rest. So he is a witch, essentially. He has made a potion. This is not just like, oh, here's some magic beans. This was intentional. Now, aside from the creepy fact that this little fucker is just hanging out in the trees making potions and waiting to give him to the young boy, let's talk about what he tells James that he must do. I don't know if this is in the movie. I think this might just be in the book. He says, take a large jug of water and pour all the little green things into it. Then very slowly, one by one, add 10 hairs from your own head. That sets them off. It gets them going. In a couple of minutes, the water will begin to froth and bubble furiously. And as soon as that happens, you must quickly drink it all down, the whole jugful, in one gulp. And then, my dear, you will feel it churning and boiling in your stomach. And steam will start coming out of your mouth. And immediately after that, marvelous things will start happening to you. Fabulous, unbelievable things, and you will never be miserable again in your life. He's telling him to drink this liquid that's going to boil his stomach. Now, I mentioned this in the last video, but I'm going to bring it up again because I think it's important. The book says that his parents were the ones that had it lucky because they had passed away. They got eaten by a rhino. It says in the long run, it was far nastier for James than it was for them. Their troubles were over in a jiffy. They were dead and gone in 30 seconds flat. Poor James, on the other hand, was still very much alive, and at once he found himself alone and frightened in a vast, unfriendly world. So if you're sticking with that theme of your life won't be miserable anymore, I think he gave him a potion, a poison, to kill the young boy. Now, in this story, James ends up dropping the bag, and they end up sinking into the ground. Now, before this man leaves, he says, whoever they meet first, be it bug, insect, animal, or tree, that will be the one who gets the full power of its magic. And I think that this is just to introduce the bugs and the peach into the story. So that is how I think that he was poisoned. Now, my textual evidence for this is that no one's allowed up on the hill. There's not even a dog or cat. Little kids can't even come visit. So there's nobody that knows that the abuse and neglect that James is under. And I guess you can argue that this man is a witch and somehow knows and wants to help him. But how does boiling and churning poisonous liquid in your stomach make you think that it's for help? I think that this is poison, and I think he was hired by the ants. So let's come back around and talk a little bit about the symbolism. So first, let's talk about the peach. What do peaches represent? I looked it up online, and they actually represent childhood, life, and happiness. Now, this is very interesting because first of all, we're told, we read that already, that the peach tree does not grow, right? So already it's a symbol of his childhood, his happiness, his life. It's not allowed to flourish. It cannot grow. He's stunted basically in this like horrible life that he has, and he's not allowed to experience anything. Now, after he ingests this poison, which by the way, in the story, like I said, he's a freaking moron, and the second he gets it, he drops it, and the little beans sink into the soil, and then a huge peach grows. He ends up getting inside of it and takes off on a journey with a bunch of bugs. I think he actually drank the liquid, and I think anything else that happens in the story is his mind's way, you know, whatever it is, whether it's wishful thinking, whether it's hallucinating, whether it's delusions after he's drinking this poison. Maybe he knows he's in for him. Maybe he knows that his aunt's finally caught up to him. Maybe whatever poison that was given to him makes him blissfully think that he has gone on this journey. But I think that the growth of the peach, because it's larger than life, I think that's a symbol of like, now I can finally be a kid. The peach goes into the ocean, and that's where he thinks of his family the most, and then it goes on a journey into the sky, like near the heavens. And then it ends up in New York, a place that he always wanted to go, presumably with his parents. I think it might say that in the movie, although in the book it doesn't clarify, but presumably that is a place where he feels maybe perhaps a connection with his parents. I don't have textual evidence for that, but that's just an idea. We'll come back to the peach in a second, but let's talk about the bugs for a second, because they're obviously a huge part of the story, and I was racking my brain thinking, like, what could these bugs mean? And I think I have a few different theories, so let me know what you guys think. Maybe one or all of these, maybe none of these. I think they may represent parts of James himself. And my theory for this is, I mean, you could even go really dark, and they could be fragments of his personality that have, you know, splintered off because of the abuse that he suffered as a young boy at the hands of his aunts. It depends how dark you want to go. But I think that they honestly could just represent parts of him. The ladybug is kind, the centipede is a rascal and he speaks up for himself, the grasshopper is wise, the glowworm is shy, the earthworm is fearful. I think they're all parts of his personality that he's never able to explore, and I think that could be one way of looking at it. I think also the bugs could perhaps represent his friends. Earlier we read, you know, he's just stuck out in the garden all day. Those are the only things that are there. There's not a dog, there's not a cat, there's no stray animals, there's no friends, but there are these insects. And in the book it is explored that he comes to understand that the bugs have kind of like a simpler life than humans do, and perhaps he doesn't understand the relationship that humans have because of the neglect that he's suffering from the people that are supposed to be taking care of him. And bugs have like a symbiotic relationship where the farmers are cool with the ladybugs and ladybugs are cool with the farmer, and they kind of benefit mutually off of each other. And so in his head he thinks that this is easy, and maybe he wants to become a part of that world. Perhaps he becomes a part of it 6 feet under, which we'll talk about in a second. Those are a few theories there. Now let's go back to the peach, because we said what the peach could represent in the beginning and the middle of the story. What does the peach represent at the end? So when I looked online, it said, you know, the peach can represent life, childhood, happiness, but if it's eaten or destroyed, it could represent the opposite. So what happens to the peach during the story? It gets eaten by sharks, it runs into a rainbow, cloud men throw stuff at it, it starts leaking fluid, it falls out of the sky and gets pierced by the Empire State Building, and then at the very end, James allows all the children to come forward and eat it until there's nothing left but a pit. So at the end of the story, at the end of my theory of when he would be poisoned, therefore at the end of his life, all that remains of this peach is a pit. Could that be telling to what actually happened in the story? It could. It very well could. Am I reaching here? I don't know. Let me know. I could just be looking through the lens of horror because that's how I see everything, but I think that there's enough here to I don't know, maybe something creepy is going on. And then at the very end of the story, he ends up living in the peach pit, and he's so happy because all the children come and visit him while he's living in this peach pit. And for me, I was thinking, ooh, this might be a little dark. I was thinking, well, it would make sense that after he passed away, he was buried in the garden. And it's quite possible that his aunts could have buried him under that peach tree. And so in a weird way, symbolizing the growth of peaches, perhaps the peach tree could absorb the nutrients from his body and actually bloom for once. And so it's like a weird, sad regrowth of life in a place that's been so desolate before, even though James isn't actually alive to witness it. Oh, this is so dark. Yeah, this is what I do best. I just make childhood books into horrible stories. But I mean, it could represent that. I don't know, something about living in the peach pit itself made me feel some kind of way, you know, about like what do you do with a peach pit? You plant it in the ground. And I just think that there's some connections there. I did want to read one other thing if I could find it. So it says that this is when the peach is falling from the sky before it gets shanked by the Empire State Building. It says that it's falling down, down, down. And this is what happens at the end. Goodbye, ladybug, gasped Peach, clinging to the stem of the falling peach. Goodbye, centipede. Goodbye, everybody. There were only a few seconds to go now, and it looked as though they were going to fall right in among all the tallest buildings. So the last part of the story before the happiness happens is James accepting that he's going to die. He's saying goodbye to his friends, the ladybugs, the only friends that he has, and he's prepared to end his life. Let me know, guys. Is this a story about a young boy who goes on a crazy adventure in a peach with a bunch of bugs? Or is it a story about a young boy who gets murdered by his two aunts and his body is placed under a peach tree. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that this was too weird to not talk about. I feel like there's too many coincidences of just like weird macabre themes throughout it, and I feel like there's a lot that you could analyze within this text. Let me know how you guys feel about this. If you just think that it's a lovely story, that's great. There's no problem with that. If you think I'm reaching, that's totally fine. If I've ruined this book for you, I apologize. But I kind of like it more now that I think it's a creepy story about murder. But, you know, that's just, that's my problem. Please feel free to add any theories that you have down below. I didn't look up anything because I didn't want anybody else's ideas to cloud my judgment when I was reading this. I don't know if this is what people think the story's about. Maybe I'll do a deep dive into other people's dark theories if they do have some. I'm not sure. But let me know what you guys think about this video, and should I turn other delightful children's stories into horrible dark tales? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time with another horror video. Bye guys!